One of those upscale country clubs where everything gleams and whispers of old money. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in ivory silk, and the scent of white roses filled the air. I'd worn my best suit, the navy one I'd bought for Sarah's funeral and had tailored last month because I'd lost weight. I wanted to look respectable for my son's big day. The reception desk sat near the entrance, manned by a young woman with a practiced smile. Behind her, name tags were arranged alphabetically on a silver tray. I approached, straightening my tie nervously. "Name, please?" she asked, fingers hovering over the tags. "Vincent Castellano, father of the groom." Her smile faltered slightly as she searched through the tags. She picked one up, hesitated, then handed it to me with an apologetic expression that should have warned me. I looked down at the white card in my hand, expecting to see my name printed in elegant script like all the others. Instead, in bold black letters, I read, "Boring old guy, invited out of obligation." The world seemed to tilt. I read it again, certain I'd misunderstood, but there it was, clear as day. My throat went dry, and I felt heat creep up my neck. "There must be a mistake," I whispered, showing the tag to the young woman. Her face went pale. "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. Let me get the wedding planner." "No." My voice came out sharper than I intended. I didn't want to cause a scene. This was Marcus's day. I forced a smile. "It's fine. Just, is there another tag?" She searched frantically but came up empty. "I'm afraid this is the only one with your name." I pinned the humiliating tag to my lapel with hands that trembled slightly. Around us, other guests chatted happily, their normal tags reading things like Uncle Robert or college friend. I was the only one marked as an obligation. Walking into the reception hall felt like entering a courtroom where I'd already been sentenced. The room buzzed with conversation and laughter. I spotted Marcus immediately, tall, handsome in his tuxedo, beaming as he shook hands with well-dressed guests. Beside him stood Sophia, radiant in her designer gown, her family clustered around them like protective angels. The Blackwoods, Sophia's family, commanded attention wherever they stood. Her father, Richard Blackwood, owned the largest construction company in the state. Her mother, Patricia, wore jewelry that probably cost more than my annual salary. Her brother, James, managed their family's real estate investments. They moved through the crowd with the confidence of people who'd never questioned their place in the world. I made my way toward Marcus, hoping for a warm greeting, maybe a chance to congratulate him properly. But as I approached, I noticed something that made my stomach drop further. Richard Blackwood caught sight of my name tag first. His eyes widened, then he nudged his wife. Patricia glanced at me, read the tag, and a small smile played at her lips. Within seconds, the entire Blackwood clan was looking at me with barely concealed amusement. "Oh my," Patricia said, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "How wonderfully honest." James chuckled, raising his champagne glass. "Well, at least they're being transparent about the guest list." The laughter that followed felt like physical blows. Other guests turned to see what was so amusing, their eyes inevitably drawn to my chest where that horrible tag announced my status as an unwanted obligation. Marcus finally noticed me approaching. For a split second, I saw something flicker across his face. Was it embarrassment? Shame? But then Sophia whispered something in his ear, and his expression hardened into polite indifference. "Dad," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "You made it." "Of course I made it," I replied, trying to keep the hurt out of my voice. I wouldn't miss my son's wedding for anything. Sophia smiled, that perfect smile she'd perfected over the 2 years I'd known her. "Vincent, how nice. I see you found your place card. Isn't it fun? We thought it would add some humor to the evening." Humor. She called my public humiliation humor. I looked at Marcus, waiting for him to say something, to defend me, to explain that this was some terrible mistake. Instead, he just nodded along with his new wife. "Yeah, Dad. Sophia thought it would be, lighten the mood." The photographer appeared then, arranging the family for formal photos. I moved to join the group, but Sophia's hand on my arm stopped me. "Oh, Vincent, these are just for immediate family," she said sweetly. "We'll make sure to get some casual shots with you later." I watched from the sidelines as they posed, Marcus with Sophia, then with her parents, then with her extended family. The Blackwoods filled the frame with their expensive clothes and practiced smiles. I remained invisible, holding my champagne glass and trying not to let my devastation show. The evening continued like a slow torture. I was seated at table 12 in the back corner of the room with distant relatives and plus ones I didn't know. The head table, where the families traditionally sat, held only the Blackwoods and their closest friends. I watched my son laugh at Richard Blackwood's jokes, saw him lean in attentively when Patricia spoke, witnessed him become absorbed into their world, while I sat forgotten in mine. During the speeches, Richard spoke eloquently about welcoming a new son into their family. Patricia talked about how perfectly Sophia had chosen her life partner. Marcus thanked both families, but his eyes never found mine in the crowd. When they cut the cake, when they danced their first dance, when they mingled with guests, I remained an observer at my own son's wedding. The final blow came during the bouquet toss. As single women gathered on the dance floor, I overheard Patricia talking to a group of her friends near my table. "Well, at least we were honest about it," she was saying, gesturing toward me. "Some people you invite out of obligation, and everyone knows it. Why pretend otherwise?" Her friends tittered appreciatively, and one of them replied, "How refreshing. Most people are too polite to be so direct." I sat there, the humiliating name tag still pinned to my chest, watching my son celebrate the beginning of his new life while publicly declaring that his father was nothing more than an obligation. The champagne tasted bitter in my mouth, and the elegant surroundings felt like a beautiful cage designed to showcase my inadequacy. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, I finally approached Marcus one last time. He was saying goodbye to the Blackwood relatives, his face flushed with happiness and alcohol. "Son," I said quietly, "can we talk for a minute?" He turned to me with slightly glassy eyes. "Sure, Dad. What's up?" I gestured toward a quieter corner of the room, away from listening ears. "Marcus, about the name tag. Was that really necessary?" For a moment, something vulnerable flickered in his expression. Then Sophia appeared at his side, slipping her arm through his possessively. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice honey-sweet but her eyes sharp. Marcus's face closed off again. "Yeah, everything's fine. Dad was just saying goodnight." That wasn't what I was saying at all, but I could see there was no point in continuing. My son had made his choice, and I wasn't part of it. I drove home in silence, the humiliating name tag finally removed and crumpled in my passenger seat. In my empty house, surrounded by photos of Marcus growing up, I finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had happened. My only child had publicly declared me an obligation, not a joy. The family I'd thought we were building had been an illusion. But as I sat there in my kitchen, staring at the crumpled name tag, something began to shift inside me. The hurt was overwhelming, but underneath it, a different feeling was growing. I'd spent years trying to be good enough for a son who apparently saw me as nothing more than a duty. Maybe it was time to stop trying so hard to belong where I clearly wasn't wanted. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to remember who Vincent Castellano really was. 3 days passed before I could bring myself to call Marcus. 3 days of replaying that wedding reception in my mind, of trying to understand how my relationship with my son had deteriorated to the point where I'd become a public joke. I'd raised him alone after Sarah died, worked overtime to pay for his engineering degree, been there for every milestone I could manage around my work schedule. How had I become nothing more than an obligation? I dialed his number Tuesday evening, after I'd finished the leftover casserole Mrs. Chen from next door had brought over. She'd seen me looking rough and decided I needed feeding. At least someone cared. "Hey, Dad," Marcus answered on the fourth ring. His voice was distant, distracted. I could hear Sophia in the background, her laugh tinkling like expensive wind chimes. "Marcus, I was hoping we could talk. About the wedding. About us." A pause. Then, "Dad, look, I know you were upset about the name tag thing, but it was just a joke. Sophia's family has a sense of humor about these things." A sense of humor? I felt my grip tighten on the phone. "Son, that wasn't humor. That was humiliation. In front of everyone who matters to you." Another pause. Longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice had taken on that patient tone people use with children or elderly relatives. "Dad, you're being overly sensitive. It's not like it was a lie, right? I mean, we invited you because you're my father, but let's be honest. We don't exactly have a close relationship." The words hit me like a physical blow. "We don't have a close relationship. Marcus, I raised you. I worked 2 jobs after your mother died to keep food on the table and pay for your education. I drove you to soccer practice, helped with homework. When you weren't working," he interrupted. "When you weren't too tired to pay attention. When you actually showed up." I sat down heavily in my kitchen chair. What are you talking about? I was there for you. Really? His voice was getting heated now. Were you there when I graduated high school? No, you were working late. Were you there when I got into state? No, you had to cover someone's shift. Were you there when I needed help with college applications? No, I had to figure that out myself because you were always too busy. Each accusation felt like a knife twist. I remembered those times. The graduation I'd missed because of a work emergency. The scholarship applications I'd been too exhausted to help with after pulling double shifts. But I'd done it all for him, to give him opportunities I never had. Marcus, I did everything for you. You did everything for work. He cut me off. And I get it, Dad. I understand you had to provide for us, but don't act like we were close. Don't act like you were Father of the Year. The background noise on his end had gotten quieter. I could picture Sophia listening to every word, probably nodding in approval. Is she there? I asked quietly. Is Sophia listening to this? What does that matter? She's my wife. We don't have secrets. But something in his tone told me she was indeed there, probably coaching him through this conversation. I'd noticed it over the past 2 years, how Marcus's attitude toward me had shifted after he started dating her. How our phone calls became shorter, our visits less frequent. How he'd gradually stopped including me in major decisions about his life. Marcus, can you meet me for coffee tomorrow? Just us. No Sophia, no distractions, just father and son. A long silence. I heard muffled voices as if he was covering the phone. Finally, I don't think that's a good idea right now, Dad. Sophia and I are trying to settle into married life, and honestly, we don't need the drama. Drama? What drama? I'm asking to have coffee with my son. Look, Dad, I've been thinking about this a lot lately. Maybe some space would be good for both of us. You clearly have some resentment about how I see our relationship, and I need time to figure things out. The line went dead. My son had hung up on me. I sat in my kitchen for a long time after that, staring at the phone in my hand. Outside, the neighborhood was settling into evening routines. Kids being called in for dinner, dogs being walked, the normal rhythms of family life that I'd once been part of. That weekend, I decided to clean out the garage, partly to distract myself and partly because I'd been putting it off for months. Among the boxes of Christmas decorations and old tools, I found a container I'd forgotten about, one of Sarah's memory boxes. Inside were things she'd saved from Marcus's childhood, report cards, art projects, photos, and at the bottom, a manila envelope with my name on it in her handwriting. I opened it with trembling fingers. The first item was a letter she'd written but never given me, dated just months before her death. My dearest Vincent, it began. I know these have been the hardest years of our lives, watching Marcus struggle with my illness, trying to keep everything normal for him. I see how hard you work, how you take on extra shifts so we can afford my treatments and still save for Marcus's college. I see how exhausted you are, how you push yourself beyond your limits for our family. I need you to know that Marcus sees it too, even if he can't express it now. One day, when he's older, he'll understand the sacrifices you made. He'll appreciate the father who gave up his own dreams to secure his son's future. Tears blurred my vision as I continued reading. Sarah had documented things I'd forgotten, the nights I'd stayed up helping Marcus with science projects after working 14-hour days, the way I'd driven through a snowstorm to get to his school play, the college fund I'd slowly built despite our medical bills. But there was more in the envelope. Phone records from the past 2 years, calls Marcus had made to our home phone that I'd apparently missed, voicemails that had somehow been saved to Sarah's old phone. With shaking hands, I scrolled through them. The messages painted a different picture than the one Marcus had described. In the earlier ones, he sounded hurt, confused. Dad, I've been calling. Did you get my messages? I got the job at Morrison Engineering. I thought you'd want to know. Another, hey Dad, Sophia and I are thinking about getting engaged. Can we talk? I felt sick. I'd changed our answering machine setup after getting too many robocalls, and somehow these messages had been rerouted to Sarah's old phone, which I'd kept charged but rarely checked. But the later messages were different. Marcus's tone had grown colder, more distant. Dad, I don't know why you're not returning my calls. Sophia says maybe you're just not that interested in my life anymore. Maybe she's right. And then, the final message, dated just 6 months ago. You know what, Dad? Forget it. Sophia's family has been more supportive in 2 years than you've been in the last 10. At least they show up when it matters. I sank onto a dusty box, holding Sarah's phone and feeling like the world had shifted beneath me. Marcus had been trying to reach out, and I'd missed it. My attempts to respect his independence, to not be a clingy father, had been interpreted as disinterest. And Sophia had been there to offer her family as a replacement. The next revelation came when I decided to go through the cards and letters Sarah had saved. Tucked between Marcus's childhood birthday cards, I found something that made my blood run cold, a note in handwriting I didn't recognize. "Marcus," it read, "I know this is hard, but you have to see the pattern. Your father chooses work over family, just like he chose work over being there for your mother's treatments. Some people just aren't capable of putting family first. You deserve better. With love, Patricia." Patricia Blackwood had been writing to my son. The date on the note was from over a year ago, during the time when I thought Marcus was simply busy with his new job and relationship. I found more notes, all in the same handwriting, all subtly poisonous. They painted me as absent, uncaring, selfish. They reminded Marcus of every missed event, every time I'd been late, every moment when I'd chosen responsibility over presence. But they never mentioned why, never acknowledged that I'd worked those extra shifts to pay off Sarah's medical debt, to build his college fund, to keep our house when the medical bills threatened to bankrupt us. The final piece of the puzzle came in a small address book of Sarah's. Tucked into the back cover was a business card for the Blackwood Construction Company with a handwritten note on the back, "Called about V, family background check complete." My hands shook as I read it. A family background check. They'd investigated me like I was some kind of threat to their daughter's future. And based on what they'd found, a blue-collar widower with a modest income and a history of working long hours, they'd decided I wasn't good enough for their family. But instead of simply excluding me, they'd done something far more calculated. They'd turned my own son against me, slowly and methodically, using his grief over my perceived absences to drive a wedge between us. They'd positioned themselves as the loving, attentive family he deserved, while painting me as the father who couldn't be bothered to show up. I sat in that dusty garage surrounded by the evidence of their manipulation, feeling a rage so pure it was almost cleansing. The wedding humiliation hadn't been a cruel joke. It had been the final public declaration of their victory. They'd successfully replaced me in my son's life, and they wanted everyone to know it. But as I sat there, a different emotion began to mix with the anger. I thought about Richard Blackwood's construction company, about their wealth and their confidence and their assumption that they were untouchable. I thought about Patricia's smug smile as she'd called my humiliation refreshingly honest. I was a civil engineer. I'd spent 30 years in the construction industry before moving to municipal inspections. I knew how the business worked, knew the corners that got cut, knew the difference between what was legal and what was right. And I remembered something Richard Blackwood had said at the reception, boasting to his friends about a big municipal contract they'd just landed, about how they'd found ways to maximize profit margins while still meeting specifications. In the construction business, those were dangerous words. And suddenly, I realized that maybe it was time to find out exactly how the Blackwood construction empire had been built. The Monday after discovering Patricia's manipulative letters, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. I needed time to think, to process what I'd learned, and most importantly, to decide what I was going to do about it. I spent the morning walking through downtown, past the gleaming office buildings and construction sites that dotted our growing city. Everywhere I looked, I saw Blackwood construction signs. They had their fingers in every major project: the new courthouse, the hospital expansion, the bridge renovation that had been in the news. Richard Blackwood hadn't been exaggerating about his company's reach. But as I walked past one of their active sites, something caught my attention. I'd been inspecting construction projects for the city for 15 years, and certain things became second nature. The concrete mix being poured didn't look right, too thin, too gray. The rebar spacing seemed off. The workers moved with the casual efficiency of people who knew they weren't being watched too closely. I stood across the street, pretending to check my phone while I observed the operation. This was the new community center project, a $12 million municipal contract that the city had awarded to Blackwood Construction after a competitive bidding process. I remembered the paperwork crossing my desk, remembered Richard's winning bid coming in just under the competition. My phone buzzed with a text from my supervisor, Tom. "Hope you're feeling better. The Blackwood inspection for the community center got moved to Thursday. Can you handle it when you're back?" I stared at the message, then at the construction site across the street. As the assigned municipal inspector for this project, I'd be the one signing off on whether their work met city standards. The irony wasn't lost on me. The family that had systematically destroyed my relationship with my son was about to have their work evaluated by me. That afternoon, I drove to the city archives and pulled the files on Blackwood Construction's recent municipal contracts. What I found made my engineering background sing with alarm. Bid specifications that cut right to the legal minimums, material lists that consistently chose the cheapest acceptable options. Timeline estimates that seemed impossible unless corners were being cut. I spread the documents across a table in the quiet archive room, my mind working through the implications. Individually, each choice was legal, technically meeting code requirements. But together, they painted a picture of a company that prioritized profit over quality at every possible turn. The next morning, I went back to work with a renewed sense of purpose. Tom noticed immediately. "You look better," he said, glancing up from his coffee. "Whatever bug you had seems to have passed." "Yeah, I think some fresh perspective was exactly what I needed." I threw myself into work with an intensity that surprised my colleagues. I requested assignments for every Blackwood construction inspection that came through our department. I volunteered for weekend overtime to review municipal contract compliance. I even started arriving early to review historical inspection records. "Damn, Vincent," said Maria, one of our junior inspectors. "Did you drink some kind of super coffee? You're like a man possessed." She had no idea how right she was. Within 2 weeks, I'd built a comprehensive picture of Blackwood Construction's practices. They had a pattern. They bid aggressively low to win contracts, then made up the difference through what the industry euphemistically called value engineering. They used cheaper materials that still met technical specifications. They simplified construction methods that reduced labor costs but also reduced structural redundancy. They found ways to technically comply with building codes while ignoring their spirit. The most damning discovery came when I cross-referenced their material suppliers. Blackwood consistently used Pinnacle materials for concrete, rebar, and structural components. A little research revealed that Pinnacle was a subsidiary company owned by Richard's brother-in-law. They were essentially buying materials from themselves at inflated prices, then using lower-quality alternatives in the actual construction while pocketing the difference. But discovering the pattern was only half the battle. Proving it would require careful documentation and, most importantly, timing. The community center inspection was scheduled for Thursday morning. I arrived at the site early, my clipboard loaded with more detailed checklists than I typically used. The project foreman, a weathered man named Eddie, met me at the gate. "Morning, Inspector. Ready to get this wrapped up?" His casual confidence told me everything I needed to know. This was a routine inspection as far as he was concerned, just another box to check on their way to final approval and payment. "Let's start with the foundation," I said, pulling out a measuring tape and level that Eddie definitely hadn't expected to see. For the next 4 hours, I inspected that construction site like my career depended on it. I measured rebar spacing to the millimeter. I tested concrete density with a portable Schmidt hammer I'd borrowed from our lab. I checked beam dimensions against the approved plans. I photographed everything and took detailed notes. Eddie's confidence evaporated by hour 2. By hour 3, he was making nervous phone calls. By the time I finished, he was sweating despite the cool October weather. "So, how'd we do?" he asked as I packed up my equipment. I looked at him steadily. "I'll have my report filed by end of business Friday." What I didn't tell him was that I'd found at least a dozen code violations. Nothing catastrophically dangerous, the building wouldn't collapse, but enough to fail inspection and require expensive corrections. That evening, I sat in my home office, drafting the most thorough inspection report I'd ever written. Every violation was documented with photographs and measurements. Every code reference was cited precisely. Every required correction was specified in detail. But more than that, I'd started to see the bigger picture. The community center was just one project. Blackwood Construction had been awarded 37 municipal contracts in the past 5 years, totaling over $180 million in taxpayer money. If they were cutting corners on all of them. I pulled out my laptop and started making phone calls to former colleagues, inspectors in other departments, even contractors who'd lost bids to Blackwood. Slowly, a network of information began to emerge. "Yeah, I always wondered how they came in so low on that hospital job," said Rick Patterson, a former co-worker who'd moved to the county office. "But their inspector signed off, so what could we say? I heard rumors about their material sourcing, admitted Janet Mills, who worked for the State Highway Department, but proving it would have been career suicide. The Blackwoods have too much political influence. Each conversation added another piece to the puzzle. Blackwood Construction's success wasn't built on superior efficiency or innovative techniques. It was built on a systematic pattern of cutting corners, using their political connections to avoid scrutiny, and leveraging their growing influence to intimidate anyone who might question their methods. By Friday evening, I had compiled a preliminary report that would have made any prosecutor smile. But I wasn't ready to go public yet. I needed more evidence, more documentation, more ironclad proof that couldn't be dismissed or buried by the Blackwoods' political allies. Saturday morning, I drove past Marcus and Sophia's new house, a beautiful colonial in Willowbrook Estates that I knew they couldn't afford on Marcus's engineer salary alone. The Blackwoods had helped with the down payment, of course, another way of ensuring their daughter's comfort while binding my son to their family's generosity. I parked across the street and watched as Marcus emerged to get the morning paper. He looked happy, content, successful in his expensive clothes and his expensive neighborhood. He had everything he wanted: a beautiful wife, a comfortable life, acceptance into a wealthy family. All it had cost him was his father. As I watched him disappear back into the house, I made a decision. I wasn't going to destroy the Blackwood empire out of revenge or spite. That wouldn't bring my son back, and it wouldn't heal the wounds that Patricia's manipulation had carved into our relationship. But I was going to do my job. I was going to be the inspector that this city deserved, the one who couldn't be bought or intimidated or convinced to look the other way. If Blackwood Construction's business practices couldn't survive proper scrutiny, that wasn't my problem. It was theirs. Sunday afternoon, my phone rang. Marcus's name appeared on the caller ID, and for a moment my heart leaped with hope. Maybe he was calling to apologize, to bridge the gap between us. "Hey, Dad," he said, and I could immediately tell this wasn't a social call. His voice had that careful, formal tone he'd been using with me for months. "Marcus, how are you? How's married life treating you?" "It's good, Dad, really good. Listen, I'm calling because Richard mentioned that you're the inspector assigned to their community center project." My grip tightened on the phone. Richard had mentioned it. Of course he had. "That's right, it's part of my regular assignment rotation." "Well, that's great. It's nice to know the project is in good hands." A pause. "Richard was hoping you might be able to expedite the final approval. They're eager to move on to the next phase." There it was. My own son, calling to ask me to give his father-in-law special treatment. The request was wrapped in family pleasantries, but the message was clear. Richard Blackwood expected preferential treatment because I was now connected to his family. "Marcus, you know I can't show favoritism in municipal inspections. That would be unethical and probably illegal." "I'm not asking for favoritism, Dad. Just, maybe a little extra efficiency. For family." For family. The words twisted in my chest like a knife. When had I ever been able to claim family as a reason for anything? When had the Blackwoods ever extended me the courtesy they expected me to give them? "Son, I'll process the inspection according to standard procedures and timeline. That's the most ethical thing for everyone involved." A long silence. Then, "Dad, is everything okay? You seem tense." I almost laughed. Tense didn't begin to cover what I was feeling. "I'm fine, Marcus. Just taking my responsibilities seriously." "Okay. Well, I'll let Richard know to expect the results on your normal schedule." After he hung up, I sat staring at my phone, feeling the last of my illusions about my relationship with my son crumble away. He hadn't called because he missed me or wanted to repair our relationship. He'd called because his new family needed something from me. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I opened my laptop and began typing a detailed memo to the city attorney's office, requesting a comprehensive review of all Blackwood Construction municipal contracts from the past 5 years. If Richard Blackwood wanted to play family politics with municipal inspections, he was about to learn that Vincent Castellano took his professional integrity more seriously than his personal pain. The game was about to change, and this time, I wasn't going to be the one left standing on the sidelines. The response from the city attorney's office came faster than I expected. Tuesday morning, I found myself sitting across from Amanda Chen, the deputy city attorney, in her sterile downtown office. She was younger than I'd anticipated, probably in her early 40s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that reminded me why she'd built a reputation as someone who didn't back down from politically sensitive cases. "Mr. Castellano," she began, reviewing the preliminary report I'd submitted. "These are serious allegations. If even half of what you're suggesting is true, we're looking at potential criminal violations, not just civil contract disputes." I shifted in my chair, feeling the weight of what I'd set in motion. "I want to be clear. I'm not making accusations. I'm documenting patterns that deserve investigation." She nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the right approach. Tell me, what made you start looking so closely at Blackwood Construction?" I hesitated. How could I explain that it started with a humiliating name tag at my son's wedding? That I'd discovered my daughter-in-law's family had systematically poisoned my relationship with Marcus? It sounded petty, personal, vindictive. "I've been noticing irregularities in their work for a while," I said instead, which was technically true, even if the timeline was compressed. "The community center inspection just confirmed my concerns." Amanda reviewed my documentation for several minutes, occasionally making notes. Finally, she looked up. "Vincent, may I call you Vincent? This is thorough work, but we'll need more before we can take any official action. What I'm seeing here could be explained away as aggressive but legal business practices. What would you need to move forward?" "Pattern evidence across multiple projects, documentation of the material substitution scheme you've identified. Ideally, insider testimony from someone within their organization." She paused. "Are you prepared for what this might involve? Blackwood Construction has significant political connections. They'll fight back hard." I thought about Marcus, about the life he'd built within the Blackwood family's embrace. If this investigation moved forward, it would destroy that life, probably end his marriage, certainly cost him the financial security he'd found. "I understand the implications," I said quietly. "Good. Because once we start down this road, there's no going back. If they realize you're the source of the investigation, they'll do everything they can to discredit you professionally and personally." That evening, I began what would become 3 weeks of the most intensive investigation of my career. I reached out to former Blackwood employees who'd left the company under mysterious circumstances. I contacted suppliers who'd lost contracts to Pinnacle Materials. I even tracked down inspectors from other municipalities who'd worked on Blackwood projects. The picture that emerged was both clearer and more disturbing than I'd initially imagined. Tommy Reeves, a former Blackwood foreman who'd been fired 6 months ago, agreed to meet me at a diner outside town. He was nervous, constantly glancing around as if expecting someone to burst through the door. "You didn't hear this from me," he said, stirring sugar into coffee with shaking hands. "But Richard Blackwood runs 2 sets of books for every municipal job. The official materials list that goes to inspectors, and the real list that goes to purchasing." "Can you be more specific?" "Take rebar, for instance. Plans call for grade 60 steel at specific spacing intervals. Official materials list shows they're ordering grade 60. But purchasing gets told to buy grade 40, cheaper, weaker, and install it at wider spacing to make up the difference." He leaned forward. "Technically meets minimum code requirements, but with zero safety margin." I documented everything Tommy told me, cross-referencing his claims with the material test results I'd been collecting from various job sites. The pattern was undeniable. Blackwood consistently used the absolute minimum acceptable materials and methods, leaving no room for the safety margins that responsible contractors built into their work. But Tommy's most damning revelation came at the end of our conversation. "The thing is," he said, "Richard doesn't just do this to increase profits. He does it because he knows he can get away with it. He's got inspectors in his pocket, city council members who owe him favors, suppliers who depend on his business. The whole system protects him." "What about people who try to speak up?" Tommy's laugh was bitter. "You mean like me? I raised concerns about the elementary school project last year. Foundation work that wasn't going to last 10 years, let alone 50. Next thing I know, I'm fired for attitude problems and blacklisted from every major construction company in the region." I drove home that night thinking about Tommy's words. The elementary school project. Hundreds of children attended classes in that building every day, trusting that it had been built to protect them. If Tommy was right, that trust was misplaced. The next morning, I submitted a formal request to inspect the elementary school foundation, citing routine structural assessment requirements. My supervisor approved it without question. After all, I'd built a reputation as the department's most thorough inspector. What I found in the basement of Lincoln Elementary made my blood run cold. The concrete foundation showed clear signs of premature settling. Hairline cracks that shouldn't appear for decades were already visible. Water stains indicated moisture penetration that proper waterproofing should have prevented. Most damning of all, I discovered several areas where the rebar installation didn't match the approved engineering drawings. I spent an entire weekend in that basement, documenting every deficiency with photographs and detailed measurements. This wasn't just about cutting corners for profit. This was about the safety of children. Monday morning, I submitted a priority report to Amanda Chen's office, with copies to the school superintendent and city council. By Tuesday afternoon, Lincoln Elementary was closed for emergency structural evaluation. The local news picked up the story Wednesday evening. I watched from my living room as a reporter stood in front of the school, explaining that newly discovered structural deficiencies had forced the closure while engineers assessed the building's safety. My phone rang during the news broadcast. Marcus's name on the caller ID sent a chill through me. "Dad, what the hell is going on?" His voice was tight with anger. "What do you mean?" "Don't play dumb. Richard says you're the inspector who shut down the elementary school. He says you're making accusations about his company's work." I chose my words carefully. "I documented structural deficiencies that posed potential safety risks to children. That's my job, Marcus. Your job is to be fair and objective, not to target specific companies with personal vendettas." Personal vendettas. The accusation hit like a slap. "Marcus, this has nothing to do with personal feelings. I found genuine safety issues." Bullshit. His voice was getting louder. "Sophia's family has been nothing but good to us, to me, and this is how you repay them? By trying to destroy their business?" I felt something break inside my chest. "Son, I would never compromise children's safety for personal reasons. The structural problems I found are real. According to you. According to one inspector with an obvious bias." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was cold. "I want you to know that whatever relationship we had left, it's over now. Don't call me, don't visit, don't send birthday cards. You're dead to me." The line went dead. I sat in my living room holding the silent phone, feeling like I just watched my son die. Thursday morning brought a meeting I'd been dreading. Tom called me into his office first thing, his face grave. "Vincent, I need to ask you directly. Is there any personal connection between you and Blackwood Construction that I should know about?" I'd prepared for this question. "My son married into the Blackwood family 6 months ago." Tom's face went pale. "Jesus, Vincent, why didn't you tell me? We could have assigned the inspections to someone else, avoided any appearance of impropriety, because I knew I could maintain professional objectivity," I said. "My personal feelings about the family don't influence my technical assessments, but it creates the perception of bias. Richard Blackwood is already claiming harassment, saying you're using your position to target his company because of family disputes." I felt my jaw clench. "Tom, have you looked at the structural assessment from Lincoln Elementary? Have you reviewed the material test results from the community center? Because if you have, you'll see that my concerns are based on engineering facts, not family drama." Tom sighed heavily. "I believe you, Vincent. I've worked with you for 15 years, and I've never questioned your integrity. But politically, this is becoming a nightmare. The mayor's getting calls, city council members are asking questions, and there's talk of bringing in outside inspectors to review your work." "Let them," I said. "I welcome the review. Because when independent engineers confirm what I've found, it'll be clear that Blackwood Construction has been cutting corners at taxpayers' expense for years. And what if you're wrong? What if your findings don't hold up under scrutiny?" I met his eyes steadily. "Then I'll accept the consequences. But Tom, I've been doing this job for 15 years. I know the difference between structural deficiency and family drama." That afternoon, I received a call from Amanda Chen. "Vincent, we need to talk. Can you come in tomorrow morning?" Her tone was professional but urgent, and I knew the investigation had reached a turning point. Friday morning, I found myself back in Amanda's office, but this time she wasn't alone. A man in an expensive suit sat in the corner, taking notes on a legal pad. "Vincent, this is David Morrison from the State Attorney General's office. We've decided to expand the investigation beyond municipal contracts." Morrison leaned forward. "Mr. Castellano, we've been looking into Blackwood Construction for some time, but we've never had someone with your technical expertise and access willing to cooperate. Your documentation has opened doors we couldn't open before." I felt a mix of relief and apprehension. "What does that mean exactly?" Amanda answered. It means we're launching a comprehensive investigation into Blackwood Construction's practices across all their contracts, municipal, state, and private. We believe there's evidence of systematic fraud, tax evasion, and safety violations spanning at least 5 years. What do you need from me? Morrison smiled grimly. Everything you've got and everything you can get. We're particularly interested in the material substitution scheme and the network of shell companies they're using to inflate costs. As I left their office, I realized that what had started as a father's desperate attempt to understand his alienation from his son had evolved into something much larger. The Blackwood empire was about to face the kind of scrutiny that wealth and political connections couldn't deflect. But as I drove home, I couldn't shake the memory of Marcus's voice on the phone, telling me I was dead to him. In trying to protect innocent children from dangerous construction practices, I'd lost my son completely. The question was whether justice would be worth that price. 3 months after my meeting with the state attorney general's office, I was sitting in my car outside the federal courthouse, watching FBI agents carry boxes of documents from the Blackwood Construction headquarters. The local news vans had been there since dawn, their satellite dishes reaching toward gray November clouds like mechanical prayers. The investigation had moved faster than anyone expected. What started as a municipal contract review had snowballed into a federal case involving mail fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy charges. The FBI had obtained warrants for every Blackwood Construction office, Pinnacle Materials, and even Richard's personal residence. I watched through my windshield as Richard Blackwood emerged from the building, flanked by expensive lawyers. Even at a distance, I could see the rage in his posture, the way he barked orders at his legal team. This was a man who'd never expected to be held accountable for his actions. My phone buzzed with a text from Amanda Chen. Press conference at 3 p.m. Thought you should know. I didn't respond. I'd done everything the investigators asked, provided technical documentation, testified before grand juries, explained construction standards to prosecutors who'd never swung a hammer. But now that the consequences were unfolding, I felt no satisfaction, only a hollow emptiness where my relationship with Marcus used to be. The press conference was held at the district attorney's office. I watched it from my living room, volume turned low, as if keeping it quiet might somehow reduce the impact on my family. Today, federal and state authorities have filed charges against Blackwood Construction and its principals, announced District Attorney Rebecca Martinez. The charges include conspiracy to defraud municipal governments, tax evasion, and multiple violations of construction safety codes that endangered public welfare. She outlined the scope of the investigation: 14 municipal projects, $47 million in taxpayer funds, systematic material substitutions that compromised structural integrity. The elementary school was specifically mentioned as an example of reckless endangerment of children for corporate profit. We want to thank the municipal inspector whose diligent work brought these violations to light, Martinez continued. This case demonstrates the importance of professional integrity and courage in protecting public safety. My phone started ringing immediately. Tom from work, colleagues from other departments, even reporters who'd somehow gotten my home number. I let them all go to voicemail. The only call I answered came that evening from a number I didn't recognize. Vincent, it's Tommy Reeves. The former Blackwood foreman sounded exhausted but relieved. I saw the news. I wanted to thank you for listening to me, for taking it seriously. You took the real risk, Tommy, speaking up when you had everything to lose. Yeah, well, turns out I wasn't the only one. FBI found 3 other former employees who'd been fired for raising safety concerns. We're all cooperating now. After he hung up, I poured myself a glass of the whiskey Sarah had bought for our 20th anniversary, the bottle I'd been saving for some special occasion that never came. Tonight felt appropriate for breaking it open. The next few weeks brought a steady stream of revelations as the investigation widened. Pinnacle Materials was revealed as a shell company designed to inflate material costs. Richard's brother-in-law, who'd never worked a day in construction, was listed as a technical consultant receiving $200,000 annually in fees. Bank records showed systematic cash payments to city inspectors in 3 different municipalities. But the most damaging evidence came from Richard's own files. Prosecutors found internal memos explicitly instructing foremen to use substandard materials while maintaining paperwork that claimed full compliance. One memo, dated just 2 years ago, read, "Municipal inspectors are lazy and underpaid. They'll sign off on anything that looks reasonable on paper. Take advantage of this." The arrogance of it took my breath away. They hadn't just been cutting corners. They'd been openly mocking the system designed to protect public safety. The personal cost became clear when I ran into Janet Walsh at the grocery store. Her daughter had been in Marcus's class in high school, and she'd always been friendly when we'd met at school events. "Vincent," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "I heard about your involvement in the Blackwood investigation." I nodded, not sure what to say. "Marcus and Sophia moved to Denver last week," she continued. "I thought you should know." My heart stopped. "Denver? Marcus got a job with a firm out there. Sophia's pregnant, you know. They wanted a fresh start, away from all the publicity." I stood in the cereal aisle, holding a box of oatmeal, trying to process what she'd told me. My son had left town without telling me. His wife was pregnant with my grandchild, and I'd learned about it from a neighbor in the grocery store. "Vincent, are you okay?" Janet's voice seemed to come from very far away. I managed to nod and excused myself, abandoning my shopping cart in the middle of the store. That night I tried calling Marcus's cell phone. It went straight to voicemail, his familiar voice asking me to leave a message. I hung up without speaking. The trial began in March, 6 months after the FBI raids. I was called as a witness on the second day, walking through the technical evidence that proved systematic material substitutions and safety violations. Richard Blackwood sat at the defense table, his expensive suit unable to hide the fact that he'd lost weight and aged years in the past few months. His lawyers tried to paint me as a disgruntled family member seeking revenge, but the evidence was too overwhelming. The structural engineers who'd independently evaluated the elementary school confirmed every concern I'd raised. The materials testing proved that Blackwood had been using substandard concrete and steel. Former employees testified about the pressure to cut corners and falsify documentation. The most damaging testimony came from Patricia Blackwood herself. Granted immunity in exchange for her cooperation, she admitted to the systematic campaign to turn Marcus against me, producing the letters she'd written and the private investigators' report they'd commissioned on my background. "We saw Vincent as a threat to our daughter's marriage," she testified, her voice barely audible. "We believed that if Marcus remained close to his father, he might not fully integrate into our family's business and social network." Sitting in the witness gallery, I felt a strange mixture of vindication and sadness. The truth was finally being spoken in public, but it had come at the cost of everything that mattered to me. The verdicts came down on a Friday afternoon in late April. Richard Blackwood, guilty on 14 counts of fraud and conspiracy. James Blackwood, guilty on 8 counts of tax evasion and conspiracy. Their company, dissolved, with assets seized to pay restitution to affected municipalities. The sentences were announced 2 months later. Richard received 12 years in federal prison. James got 8 years. Patricia, who'd cooperated with prosecutors, received 2 years probation and community service. I wasn't in the courtroom when the sentences were read. I was at home, packing boxes for my own move. Tom had offered me early retirement with full pension, and I'd accepted. The publicity had made it impossible for me to continue as a municipal inspector. Every decision I made would be scrutinized for bias, every approval questioned for political motivation. I'd found a small house in Asheville, North Carolina, near the Blue Ridge Mountains. It was a place where I could start over, where nobody knew about Vincent Castellano, the whistleblower, or Marcus Castellano's father. The moving truck was scheduled for Monday morning. Sunday evening, I was wrapping Sarah's china when my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw a young woman I didn't recognize. She was blonde, very pregnant, and crying. I opened the door, and Sophia Blackwood, now Sophia Castellano, stood on my porch. "Mr. Castellano," she said, her voice breaking. "Can I please come in? I need to talk to you about Marcus." I stood aside, too shocked to speak. She wadded into my living room, looking around at the packed boxes and bare walls. "He doesn't know I'm here," she said immediately. "He made me promise never to contact you." I gestured to the one chair that wasn't covered in packing materials. "Please sit down. When is the baby due?" 6 weeks. She touched her belly protectively. "It's a girl. We're naming her Sarah after Marcus's mother." The name hit me like a physical blow. My granddaughter would carry my wife's name, and I might never meet her. "Mr. Castellano, I need you to know that Marcus is destroying himself with guilt," Sophia continued, tears streaming down her face. "He barely sleeps, barely eats. He keeps saying he chose the wrong side, that he should have believed you instead of my parents." I sat down heavily on a packing box. "Why are you telling me this?" Because I can't watch him suffer anymore. Because our baby deserves to have a grandfather. Because... She took a shuddering breath. Because I'm the one who poisoned him against you, and I don't know how to fix it. We sat in silence for a long moment. Outside, the neighborhood was settling into evening routines. Dogs being walked, children being called in for dinner. Normal family sounds that seemed to belong to a different world. "The letters your mother wrote," I said finally. "Did you know about them?" She nodded miserably. "I helped write some of them. I was so young, so desperate to fit into their world. They made it seem like you were a threat to my marriage. Like Marcus would never truly commit to me as long as he had a close relationship with you. And now? Now I've lost my parents to prison, my husband to guilt, and my daughter will grow up without knowing her grandfather because I was too stupid and selfish to see what was right in front of me." She looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. "Mr. Castellano, I know I have no right to ask this, but is there any way you could forgive us? Any way we could try to be a family again?" I looked at this young woman, so different from the confident socialite who'd orchestrated my humiliation at the wedding. She was broken, frightened, and carrying my granddaughter. "Sophia," I said gently, "where is Marcus now?" "At our apartment in Denver. He's working late again, trying to lose himself in blueprints and calculations." She wiped her eyes. "He keeps a picture of you and his mother on his desk. He stares at it when he thinks I'm not looking." I made a decision that surprised us both. "Would you like me to come back with you, to talk to him?" Her face lit up with hope so bright it was almost painful to see. "You would do that? After everything we did to you?" I thought about the boxes packed around us, the new life waiting in North Carolina, the peace I'd planned to find in the mountains. Then I thought about my son, carrying guilt that belonged to other people, and my granddaughter, who would be born into a world of regret and recrimination. "Family isn't about keeping score, Sophia," I said. "It's about showing up when it matters." For the first time in over a year, I allowed myself to hope that it wasn't too late to matter. The flight to Denver was the longest 2 hours of my life. Sophia sat beside me, fidgeting with her wedding ring and occasionally placing her hand on her belly when the baby kicked. We'd barely spoken since leaving my house. There wasn't much to say that could undo 2 years of manipulation and pain. "He might not want to see me," I said as our plane began its descent. "He will," she replied with more confidence than I felt. "He just doesn't know it yet." Marcus and Sophia's apartment was in a modern complex near downtown Denver, the kind of place young professionals lived when they were starting over. As we rode the elevator to the 3rd floor, I wondered what I would say to my son. How do you apologize for being right? How do you forgive someone for believing lies about you? Sophia used her key, calling out as we entered. "Marcus, I'm home, and I brought someone to see you." The apartment was small but nicely furnished, with large windows overlooking the Rocky Mountains. I could see Marcus through the doorway to what must have been their home office, hunched over a drafting table, exactly as Sophia had described. "Who did you bring?" he called without looking up. "If it's another doctor, I told you I'm fine." "Marcus." My voice came out rougher than I'd intended. He spun around in his chair, his face cycling through shock, confusion, and something that might have been hope before settling into wariness. He'd lost weight, I realized. His clothes hung loose on his frame, and there were dark circles under his eyes that made him look older than his 29 years. "Dad? What? How?" He looked at Sophia, who'd positioned herself near the doorway like she was ready to bolt. "What's going on?" "She came to see me," I said, nodding toward Sophia. "She told me about the baby." "About how you've been?" Marcus stood slowly like his joints hurt. "Sophia, we talked about this. I told you. You told me never to contact him," she interrupted. "You never told me not to visit him." Despite everything, I almost smiled. She was still manipulative, just using her skills for a different purpose now. "Marcus," I said, "can we talk? Just for a few minutes." He looked between us, his jaw working like he was trying to decide whether to throw us out or break down crying. Finally, he nodded toward the living room. We sat on opposite ends of their couch, an ocean of awkwardness between us. Sophia had disappeared into the kitchen, giving us privacy while staying close enough to intervene if needed. "You look good," Marcus said finally, which was a lie. I looked like a man who'd spent 6 months watching his family destroy itself. "You look terrible," I replied, which was the truth. He laughed, a short bark that held no humor. "Yeah, well, destroying innocent people's lives takes a toll. You didn't destroy anything, son. You were manipulated by people who saw you as a tool to use against me. Marcus shook his head. Don't make excuses for me. I'm 29 years old, Dad. I should have been smart enough to see what was happening. You were grieving. You lost your mother when you were 17, and you were looking for family, for belonging. The Blackwoods gave you that, or at least made you think they did, by turning me against my own father. His voice cracked. Do you know what I said to you on the phone? Do you remember? I remembered every word, but I wasn't going to repeat them. You were protecting what you thought was your family. I told you that you were dead to me. Tears were sliding down his face now. I told my own father that he was dead to me. And then I found out that you were right about everything. About the Blackwoods, about their business, about how they'd been using me. Marcus, no, let me finish. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. When the FBI arrested Richard, when all the evidence came out about the construction fraud, I realized that you hadn't been targeting them out of spite. You'd been doing your job. You'd been protecting people, protecting kids, from buildings that might collapse. I waited, letting him work through what he needed to say. And the worst part is that I knew, he continued. Deep down, I knew something was wrong. I'd seen Richard's company's work, seen the corners they cut, the way they treated their employees. But I ignored it because I wanted to belong to their world so badly. You wanted security, I said. After losing your mother, after watching me struggle to keep us afloat, you wanted stability. That's not a character flaw, Marcus. That's human nature. He looked at me with red, swollen eyes. How can you not hate me? The question hung in the air between us. How could I explain that loving someone meant forgiving them even when they didn't deserve it? How could I tell him that I'd rather have a son who made mistakes than no son at all? Because you're my boy, I said simply. You've been my boy since the day you were born, and you'll be my boy until the day I die. Nothing you do or say can change that. Marcus broke then, really broke, sobbing like he had when he was small and had fallen off his bike. Without thinking, I moved to his end of the couch and put my arms around him, feeling how thin he'd gotten, how much weight he'd lost carrying guilt that wasn't entirely his to bear. I'm so sorry, Dad, he whispered against my shoulder. I'm so sorry for everything. I know you are, and I forgive you. We sat like that for a long time, father and son, holding each other while 2 years of pain slowly began to drain away. Eventually, Sophia appeared with tea, her own eyes red from crying. I owe you an apology too, Mr. Castellano, she said, setting the tray on their coffee table. I was young and stupid and desperate to impress my parents, but that doesn't excuse what I did to you and Marcus. I looked at her, this young woman who was carrying my granddaughter, who'd driven across 3 states to try to repair the damage she'd helped create. We all made mistakes, Sophia. The question is what we do now. Marcus straightened, wiping his face. What do you mean? I mean, do we keep carrying this guilt and anger, or do we try to build something better? You're about to have a daughter. She deserves better than parents who are consumed with regret and a grandfather who's too proud to forgive. You'd want to be involved? Sophia asked tentatively. After everything? I thought about the house in North Carolina, the quiet retirement I'd planned, the safety of a life without complications. Then I thought about a little girl named Sarah who would grow up without knowing her grandfather if I chose pride over love. If you'll have me, I said. The next few months were a careful dance of rebuilding trust. I postponed my move to North Carolina and rented a small apartment in Denver instead. Marcus and I met for coffee every weekend, slowly learning how to be father and son again. Sophia and I were more cautious with each other, but her pregnancy gave us common ground. We both wanted what was best for the baby. The day Sarah Elizabeth Castellano was born was the day I understood what redemption really meant. I held my granddaughter in the hospital, looking down at her perfect tiny face while Marcus and Sophia slept exhaustedly in the bed nearby. And I realized that some things were worth any amount of pain. She has your eyes, Marcus said softly, having woken to watch me with his daughter. She has her mother's nose, I replied, and her father's stubborn chin. Sophia stirred, smiling without opening her eyes. She has her grandfather's hands. Look how long her fingers are. We were quiet for a moment, the 3 of us and baby Sarah, existing in that perfect bubble that surrounds new families. Dad, Marcus said finally, I want to ask you something. Anything. Would you consider moving to Denver permanently? I know you were planning to retire in North Carolina, but Sarah's going to need her grandfather close by. I looked down at the baby in my arms, at her son who'd found his way back to me, at his wife who'd risked everything to make this moment possible. I think North Carolina will wait, I said. 6 months later, I was living in a house just 10 minutes from Marcus and Sophia's apartment, close enough to babysit, but far enough away to give them space as a new family. I'd found work as a consulting engineer, helping other municipalities improve their inspection processes, work that felt meaningful without being politically charged. The Blackwoods were gone from our lives entirely. Richard was serving his sentence in federal prison. James had moved to Florida after his release, and Patricia was living quietly with her sister in Phoenix. They'd lost everything: their business, their social standing, their family connections. But in losing them, Marcus had found something more valuable. He'd found his way home. One evening, as I was helping Sophia bathe baby Sarah while Marcus cooked dinner, she looked up at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "What is it?" I asked. "I was just thinking about that wedding reception," she said quietly. "About the name tag, about how cruel we were to you." I lifted Sarah from the baby bath, wrapping her in a soft towel while she gurgled happily. "That feels like a lifetime ago," I said. "Do you ever regret it? Standing up to my family, I mean." "If you hadn't, Marcus and I might still be living in their world, and you'd still be working as a municipal inspector." I considered the question while I dried Sarah's impossibly small fingers and toes. If I hadn't discovered the Blackwoods corruption, would Marcus and I have found our way back to each other? Would this little girl exist? Would Sophia have ever realized that love wasn't about choosing sides? "No regrets," I said finally. "Sometimes the hardest thing and the right thing are the same thing." That night, as I tucked Sarah into her crib and kissed Marcus and Sophia goodnight, I realized that the humiliation I'd felt at that wedding reception had been a gift in disguise. It had forced me to see clearly, to act with courage, and ultimately to find my way back to what mattered most. I'd been labeled as an obligation, an afterthought, a boring old man invited out of duty rather than love. But in the end, I'd proven something more important, that sometimes the people who seem least important are the ones willing to do what's necessary to protect the people they love. Walking back to my own house under the Denver stars, I thought about Sarah's letter, the one I'd found in the garage that started this whole journey. She'd been right. Marcus had eventually understood the sacrifices I'd made. He'd eventually appreciated the father who gave up his own comfort to secure his son's future. It had just taken a little longer than either of us expected. But some things, the important things, the things that really matter, are worth the wait. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.